Hey everyone, it's WhyteCross, and this is the video that I promised from the poll that we had over the weekend about whether or not you folks were interested in seeing the newest addition to the Lydian Horde. And fortunately, the ayes had it. We had, I think, an 83% positive response, and that was based on something like 20 different votes. I really appreciate you guys kind of giving me your opinions about something like this. I hope that the video is worthwhile watching because this has really been such a fun journey, this whole Lydian Horde, and I have really enjoyed sharing it with you. Quick disclaimer, as always, I'm not a financial analyst. I'm not trying to give you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my knowledge and experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. We're not going to worry so much about a concept on this video. My regular watchers know that I usually propose a concept and then we talk about how it works with the subject matter of the particular video. In this case, this is just the subject matter. What is the Lydian Horde? So back in early April of 2023, I visited a local coin store that I don't go to very often, and lo and behold, they had three interesting old pour 10-ounce silver bars. We call these bars 10-ounce class because back when they were making these bars in the 60s and 70s, they poured them individually. And then when each bar was cool, they would stamp the weight on them. They would weigh them individually and then stamp them individually. One person's job was literally to stamp the weight onto each of these bars. And here's an example. This is a Star Metals bar, and you can see it says 8.91 troy ounces. So that was what they did when they were making these bars. They would actually weigh each bar individually after they had cooled from being poured into the mold. They were clearly shooting for about 10 ounces for those bars, and they were different sizes. This is an example of a 5-ounce bar. You can see it says 5.28 ounces there. So they were nominally shooting for that 10 ounce, that 5-ounce, that 25 ounce, that 100-ounce pour, but the production methods were such that they weren't getting that close to them. So they consequently had to weigh each bar individually and then stamp the weight into each bar with punches. And that's what they did. So early April of this year, I visited that shop and they just happened to have three bars. Those three bars that they had were a Western States refinery bar. There's an example of that one there. They also had the Star Metal bar that I just showed you, and then they had bars by Hoffman and Hoffman. Three pretty well-known, relatively well-collected bars from those people who really try to steer towards these early bullion bars of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I picked up all of these bars and was happy to have them, and I thought that that was the end of the story. I thought these three bars had come in unexpectedly. I don't see bars like this very often where I am, so I picked up all three, and I thought that was the end of the story. Shortly after that, the heirs of the estate from which these bars came back to the store and sold this dealer something like 2.5, 3 dozen other bars, all of this same vintage, even more rare manufacturers than the ones that I've just shown you, including many, many multiples of the bars that you see here before you. So many, many Star Metals bars, many Hoffman and Hoffman bars. There was a big selection of the international vaults refining bars like this one. So these are very scarce and pretty sought after bars. And I had to think long and hard about getting into this entire hoard, which now I felt confident that I could call a hoard. It really was the individual that had amassed these bars, had been located in the Midwest, and traveled out to the Four Corners area of the United States, in particular Colorado and I believe New Mexico, and sometimes ventured out to as far as California, and he was on a mission. Whatever his business was, and I haven't found that out yet, he was actively pursuing these bars everywhere he went. And it wasn't just the old poured bars. It was 5 or 6 manufacturers. That was really it. He was really just interested in those key central bars, and he didn't seem to deviate very much. So after much soul searching and rearranging some funds, I acquired the bulk of that hoard. And then, again, the heir of the estate brought in a couple more bars. And those bars, I believe, was one more of the Hoffman and Hoffman and one more of the Star Refining. And at that point, I was kind of hoping that that was the end of the story, because at this point, I was 36 bars plus into this, something approaching 350 troy ounces of silver that, while I am thrilled to own, I wasn't really looking for. I wasn't really out searching for these types of bars, but I did feel kind of a need to keep this collection together. We collectors have to stick up for each other, and to honor the spirit of this guy going out in the 70s and 80s and finding these bars, I just thought was a really compelling story. So I fought to keep this collection together, and that's where I am at this point. And then, believe it or not, just a few days ago, the heirs of the estate came back to the store with five more bars, including one bar that I hadn't seen yet in this hoard of bars. Now, that was exciting for me to be able to pick up at least one new maker from this series. And the bars that you see here, these ones, are the most recent addition. They are 2 Star Metal bars, 2 Hoffman and Hoffman bars, and this newest edition, it is the only one from this refinery, from this maker, so far to appear in this hoard. And I did have a chance to speak with the heir of this estate, and at this point I am reasonably sure that this is the last of the groups. Now, it's my understanding that this was quite a large estate with lots of moving parts and lots of people involved, so I'm definitely not going to say never with this last group being the end of the story. There may still very well be more bars in this estate, but I would say it's probably an 80% chance, maybe 85% chance at this point that we've gotten all of them. So those were the new bars, and I just wanted to kind of go over them in a little bit more detail so you guys can kind of get the flavor for these at home, and see where I am in terms of cataloging each of these bars, doing a Sigma exam on them, looking for any noticeable telltale signs of production methods and minting methods, and also cataloging the weights and how that weight that is on the bar compares to the weights on my modern digital scale. So that's what I've been doing. So we have 2 Star Metal bars, 2 Hoffman and Hoffman bars, and this new addition from JKL. So really briefly, the Star Metal bars, they are a bar that is popular with people who collect these types of bars. They are not the most scarce of these bars by any means, but I think that they're really neat, and they have kind of a neat logo on them, and I think that that goes a long way into making these the kind of bars that people really like to collect. That was my little tag there at the bottom. That's a Lydian Horde number 41. So you can see the size, the shape, the scale of this one. It's got that classic bathtub or coffin form that we collectors of these early type bars really kind of like. I've been getting some requests from folks who've been watching the videos asking me for a little bit of a closer look with these types of bars. So I want to kind of zoom in there a little bit so you can really kind of see the detail. You can see the scale, the size, the shape of this bar. Again, this is one of maybe 15 bars now in this series, maybe 12 or 15, that are made by Star Metals. And we do believe that this is the second version of Star Metals bar. Their original bars, a little bit more crude. The logo was a little bit less developed. And unfortunately, none of those earliest bars were included in the Horde, at least up to this point. They're currently on eBay in that $400 to $500 range. I like this one in particular for the patina. Several of the bars in this Horde have the same kind of muted rainbow look to them. I love some of these pore lines, some of these features of the minting process. I think that they're just a really interesting bar. I love the Star Metals bar. Glad that there were so many of those involved in this Horde. Next up, the Hoffman and Hoffman. You guys have seen these ones before. Nothing really dramatic about these. They have a little bit more of those angled sides, again, that kind of bathtub shape form that we all seem to be drawn towards. So two more of the Hoffman and Hoffman bars, a little bit more scarce maybe than the Star Metals bar, but I'm not going to say that they are more desirable. I think that there are fewer of the Hoffman and Hoffmans, but I think the Star Metal bars a little bit more interesting. So I think they're really about the same, again in that $400 to $500 range, with silver being somewhere in that $20 to $25 per ounce range. So $200 to $250 worth of silver at current prices, and the bars are selling in that $400 to $500 range. So somewhere between 75 and 100% premium for these types of bars. I get the feeling that some of these bars, because they have been untouched for what we think is probably 30 years, since the gentleman was out scouring the western United States for these bars, some of them have developed a little bit of a patina, and they haven't been knocked around kind of as much as some of the bars that have been in a little bit more heavily circulation, a little bit heavier circulation, being traded back and forth between collectors over that same period of time. And that goes back to condition, something that we've talked about a lot on this channel. And we will be talking about even more as we get further into numismatic pieces. So Star Metals and Hoffman. And then this JKL bar. And I'm scratching my head about this one a little bit because there's just not very much information out there. VintagePouredBar.com, AllEngelhard.com, and the other resources that are out there just don't have any information on this bar. Now, there are examples that have been sold recently, and there is an example on eBay right now as I'm filming. Let's go ahead and get that close up. You can see the little pigtail there, that sprue from where the bar was poured. It's an attractive bar, and at 10.67 ounces, at least the stated weight on this bar, this is the heaviest bar out of more than 40 bars included in the Horde to this date. So it's an unusual bar. It's the lone example, and we only have one other bar that is the only example. And I've shown this one off before. This was not part of this most recent purchase, but this American Credit bar with that Balthrop and Company counter stamp on it, there was only one of these bars in the Horde, and this one is particularly scarce, even rare, and highly sought after by collectors. Several people have already reached out to me and asked me if it is for sale. Like all of the bars in the Lydian Horde, at this time, none of them are for sale. I'm really more interested in cataloging and learning more about these pieces and trying to keep this set together for as long as I can. But the only other example of the JKL bar, so one JKL, one of those American Credit bars, one example of each in the Horde, and that really makes them different because every other bar in the Horde there were multiples of, and in some cases many, many multiples of. What do we do know about them? Again, it's the heaviest bar. The next closest is one of the Hoffman and Hoffman bars at 10.32 troy ounces, so you can see that this is a substantially heavier bar. One sold on eBay that had some really gnarly cooling lines and cracks all through it. This bar is actually pretty pristine. Those cracks and those cooling lines, just part of the manufacturing process. Some people really like them. I think it's really kind of the viewer's decision. If you really like those cooling lines, those cracks and those big divots, then I can certainly appreciate those bars along with you. But there comes a point where they're a little bit distracting from the bar, and that bar that was available, that sold not too long ago, has got a lot of those, and I think it almost kind of detracts from the bar. My own personal take, your opinion about these is certainly valid, every bit as valid as mine is. And there is one right now on eBay at 10.68 troy ounces, so this one at 10.67 troy ounces. They are virtually identical. The one that's on eBay, asking price of $429.99, 17 people watching at this point. So there's a lot of interest, but its premium is maybe not quite as high as some of the other bars included in this Horde. And kind of glad for that. Kind of glad that there's only one example. That way I'm not in too deep to a bar that's not particularly valuable. the interesting JKL bar. So there we go. One new bar from this Horde. 5 new bars total, but only 1 new refinery included in the most recent purchase that added to this. And again, kind of hoping that that's the end of the story here, because I don't need to sink any deeper into this Horde if I can avoid it. I wanted to do a quick comparison. We're going to do some weights and also using the Sigma. One of the metrics that I've been using as I've been cataloging the Lydian Horde is where the bars fall on the Sigma when the Sigma is set to 99.9% purity. If you're not familiar with the Sigma, or if you're vaguely familiar with the Sigma, it doesn't work the way that most people think it does. You can't simply put something onto the Sigma and have it tell you what that item is. Instead, you are selecting what you think the item is, and then the Sigma will either agree or disagree to an extent. It is a fine distinction, but it's a really important distinction for you folks who are considering buying a Sigma. It's not a magic genie. It doesn't tell you exactly what you have. It's not the same as an XRF. Those are considerably more expensive. But I have found very few faults with the Sigma as long as you are willing to understand that there is a learning curve and it can't answer every question for you. It only works as another set of eyes. So without further ado, I thought it would be interesting to compare this old poor Engelhard bar. So this is a 10th series, and that's a P prefix bar. These weren't incredibly uncommon, but I thought it was kind of an interesting parallel. These bars came out about the same times as the bars that we're looking at here, but the thing that really sets these Engelhard bars apart, and it took me a while to even make this connection, it's something that's only occurred to me recently, and maybe you already figured this out and I didn't. But the majority of these bars, in fact, all of these bars from the Lydian Horde, from that period of time when they would have to hand stamp the weight into each bar individually. Engelhard bars from the same period of time say on them that they are 10 troy ounces. Now, I actually mentioned in one of the earlier videos about 999 silver bars for advanced collectors, I believe it was the 10 ounce bar video, that these bars always tend to run a little bit high for me. The ones that are in my stack, the ones that I've come across, the ones that have gone through my stack and out the other door, all seem to weigh just over 10 troy ounces. And I think that that was probably an intentional production method. I think Engelhard realized that they could create a much more streamlined process for these bars and a much greater scalability for these bars. And Engelhard wasn't like a small mom and pop like some of the bars that you see here behind it. Some of these bars they made a few thousand of. Even this more scarce 10th series bar, I believe Engelhard made something on the order of 50,000 of these. So they recognized that there was a scalability with just saying 10 troy ounces. And if they were a little bit heavier than that, so be it. As long as they were a small amount over, and it wasn't a cripplingly large amount, and as long as the bars didn't seem to be underweight, and I think that's a good distinction to make because I've never come across one of these bars that was underweight, I think that was intentional. I think Engelhard was intentionally casting these bars as close as they could to 10 troy ounce, maybe a gram or two above a troy ounce, a 10 troy ounce threshold, just to get these out the door. That was what they focused on, and Engelhard lasted doing that for decades and decades, so maybe they were on to something. This is one of my favorite bars from the series. I've mentioned before that I've got dozens of these. Check out the cooling lines on this one. Isn't that radical? Really neat. Each of these bars has an individual character, an individual face. I think that they're all really fun to collect. One of my all-time favorite bars. So I thought it would be interesting if we could kind of compare one of these Engelhard bars, these really relatively common 10th series P prefix bars, to these much more scarce American, Californian specifically, poured bars of about the same period of time. Again, each one of those individually poured, individually weighed, and individually stamped with the weight on them. You can see how slow that process was compared to the Engelhard bars of the same times that were being churned out by the tens of thousands. So when I am checking the Sigma for these pieces, what I'm doing in the Excel file that I'm keeping on all of the bars in the Lydian Horde, and again, that's not these two Engelhard pieces, they have nothing to do with it. I am using the sigma, and I'm setting it to silver, and I'm setting it to 99.9% pure silver. Hopefully you can see that on your screen at home. Silver 99.9% pure. Now, sigma will tell you if the item that you are putting onto the sigma is 99.9% pure now that I have selected that preset. And that's that distinction I was talking about. You can't just turn it on and put something on it. So we're going to start with one of the new Hoffman and Hoffman bars. And you can see that the bar is, the cursor is between those two brackets, not dead center, but just one space over to the left. And hopefully that's showing up okay on your screen at home. I'm calling that in my file a -1. All of the bars that I've tested so far have been easily within the 99.9% bracket on the sigma, but they all measure slightly differently. So bars that are one space to the left are a -1, two spaces to the left a -2, dead center is dead center, and then if it's one space to the right, that's a +1, and one space to two spaces to the right, that's a +2. So you could see where that Hoffman and Hoffman fell. This is the next Hoffman and Hoffman. Again, a -1. It's one space over on the bracket. And unfortunately, my video camera holder is right in the way, so I can't tell for certain that you're seeing this. That star metal is dead center. It's right smack in the middle, and I believe that's the way it is with almost all of these star metal bars. And the other star metal bar, that one wants to be right in the middle. I would call that in the middle. So dead in the middle again for these star metal bars. What does that mean? What does the +1, -1 mean? Probably nothing much. I'm just trying to capture as much information about the bars included in this Horde as I possibly can, because I do feel at some point there is some information contained with all of the metrics that I'm taking that will be helpful in establishing authenticity, participation from being in this Horde, and a slew of other things that I am anxious to capture while I've got these bars in my hands and I've got the tools to test them. The reason I wanted to show you the sigma was specifically for this JKL bar. And I don't know if you can see that again at home on my screen, on your screen, but it is a +2. So it is the cursor is two spaces off dead center. And it's the only bar in this 40+ Horde that is a +2. And it's consistently a +2. Whenever I put it on the sigma, the cursor is exactly two spaces to the right of dead center. Again, not exactly sure what that means. I'm sure it's got something to do with the alloy, with the pour, with the mold that was used, the iron contained within. It could be all sorts of different things, but I did think it was interesting that of all 40+ bars included in this Horde, the JKL bar is the only one that's a +2. So there we go. Some sigma information, and I just wanted to give you kind of a quick idea. You know what, while we've got the sigma here, and again, hoping that you can actually read this along with me, I'm going to go ahead and set this one more time, and we're just going to see where that Engelhard P prefix 10th series falls. So we're going to go back to silver. We're going to set it at 99.9% pure. Again, the way the sigma works is you have to tell the sigma what you think you have, and then it will agree with you or disagree with you. So there we are with the Engelhard bar, just about dead center, and it's about a +1. So interesting to note, the Engelhard bar also falls within the brackets. I would call this a +1 if I were to include this in the spreadsheet that I'm working on, the Excel file that I'm working on. This bar is not part of that Horde. I pulled this bar also just quickly. This is a 2nd series commercial bar, and you've seen bars like this many times before. I've held them before. This is the 10-ounce bar. This is a 10-ounce bar, or roughly 10-ounce bar. And one of the things that makes the older poured bars, the 2nd series commercial bar from the mid to late 1980s versus this star metal bar, probably very late 70s, early 1980s, again, California versus probably the UK or New Jersey maybe for the Engelhard bar, certainly not a Canadian bar. One of the things that makes these bars interesting, and one of the things that I think it makes them really appeal to collectors, is because they are thick. These are really dense, thick, chunky little bars. And whenever you've got that chunkiness, you've got what feels like a heavier bar in your hand. It's not spread out as much. When you've got something that is spread out compared to something that is really compact, you feel that hefty difference. And I think that's one of the things that attracts people to these older poured bars. They just have that heavy little feeling to them that is hard to explain. So really quickly, we'll do some quick weights really fast, since people were asking me to spend a little bit more time kind of going into what the bars were like when you can actually see them in person. We've got my digital scale set for troy ounces. It says OZT on it. Now, I've said before that when we're using the scale, a digital scale, you really need to have it on a firm surface. And in this case, we're using my Navajo blanket here like I always do for my backdrop. I'm sorry some folks don't like that. I think it's kind of a neat backdrop. It at least sets me aside from some of the other guys out there. We're just going to take a quick look. So the star metal bar at 9.91. 9.92. I think that's accurate. I'm pretty sure that's what the bar showed when I was looking at it on the spreadsheet. This is the other star metal bar. I believe it says 9.97. 9.98, so we're just over with that one. We're going to hold off on the JKL. We're going to go for the Hoffman and Hoffman. So this one, 10.31 troy ounces. 10.33 is what it's showing. So nice difference there, just a little bit heavier than what its stated weight is. The second Hoffman and Hoffman, 10.32. 10.34. Again, my scale is usually very accurate. It may be tiny little bit off because we're on the blanket rather than being on a hard surface. Always put your scale on a hard surface unless you're shooting a video for the folks at home. And then before we hit the JKL, let's just try the Engelhard and see if I'm wrong. It'll be fun to get proven wrong in front of everybody. But like I said, these second series commercial bars, or sorry, rather these 10th series P prefix bars tend to run a little bit heavier. 10 troy ounces is what it says. 10.04 troy ounces is what it's showing. Now, even with those really radical cooling bubbles beneath it, it's still greater than 10 troy ounces. And I think that's one of those cases where it is, intentional. I think Engelhard was fully aware that they were pouring heavy, but it made more sense for them to burn through tens of thousands of ounces of silver and call it 10.00 rather than individually stamping the bars like they did with each one of those bars you see me before you here. So lastly, this is that sole example of the JKL bar. I believe that says 10.67. My eyesight's a little bit difficult to read that with, but I think that says 10.67. 10.68. So not quite as big an overage as some of the other bars here, but you can see one of the attractions to these older pour bars is that they tend to run just a little bit heavier. Those Engelhard 10th series rather, always seem to be a little bit heavy, a little bit fat. The rest of these bars, there are a few examples in the Lydian Horde that are under, but really when it's under, it is 1/100th of an ounce. So it's 10.65 instead of the stated 10.66 troy ounces. It's really a very small amount that these bars, when they're off, are off. And it's if they are off, it's almost always to the positive. Those sigma readings, I'm still trying to kind of figure out exactly what they mean, but I do think they're a pretty interesting thing to see. But now you know. The Lydian Horde so far has been 4 individual purchases, all from the same estate, all from the same heir of that estate. And I'm thrilled that I finally had a chance to meet that heir a few days ago before I shot this video, so I at least had a little bit of background to fill in about this buyer. This was somebody that I admire greatly. He was out scouring the American West and Southwest for just these few makers. He was really crossing that boundary between bullion stacking and bullion collecting when very few other people were giving it that much thought. So my hat's off to this gentleman, and I'm thrilled to be custodian of this Horde for the time being, at least. I think it's a really, really interesting thing, and it's really occupied a lot of my time in a very positive way lately. There we go, the Lydian Horde, the 4 individual, hopefully last purchases that combine to make this 40-plus bar Horde possible. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below. I'll try to address them if I possibly can. If you know anything about that JKL refinery, let me know. Again, it's the only example that's included in this Horde. One of only a couple examples that I could find online. Doesn't seem to be an especially valuable bar, but it is an interesting bar nonetheless, and I'm glad that as the heaviest bar in the Horde so far, it's one that really makes the Horde just a little bit more special, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to pick it up at the last moment. If you have any questions about the Lydian Horde, if you have any questions about any of the makers we've discussed today, leave them down below. And if I get any more information about these bars, including the various entities that I've been speaking with about these bars that I hinted at in the last big video on the Lydian Horde, I will try to share some information with you. Again, these aren't all the bars by any means. This is just a small fraction. I just wanted to have an interesting backdrop for you guys who listen to my voice and look at the pretty pictures. Thanks again, as always, for being with me. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe so you can be a part of this community. It means a lot to me. And as always, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as you go deeper into the world of physical precious metals.